Resuming debate, the honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have had the honour of serving the people of Kitchener-Conestoga and being part of many important discussions and debates here in this chamber over the past 10 years. As members of Parliament, we are given the solemn obligation to chart the way forward for this great nation of Canada. The motions we table, the amendments we consider, the legislation we adopt will always impact, positively or negatively, the very people who elected us to represent them here in the capital city of our nation, and they will also impact generations of Canadians to follow. The impact of our deliberations and decisions we make on this critical life and death issue will impact the very fabric of our country, and if I may say it, Mr. Speaker, will leave a lasting legacy for good or for ill of our understanding of what it means to be part of the human family. Mr. Speaker, because of the very serious nature of the topic in front of us today, we, and by that I mean every single member of this chamber, must take a step back and consider some very foundational questions. Each of us needs to ask ourselves these difficult questions. How you and I as members perceive these foundational issues is absolutely key to addressing this sobering topic before us today. Mr. Speaker, consider with me for the next few moments these questions. What does it mean to be human? What gives human life meaning and value? Does every human life possess intrinsic value and dignity, regardless of perceived deformity, regardless of perceived disability, regardless of perception of being a burden, regardless of whether or not a person may have achieved their best before date? For me, the answer to all of these questions is a resounding yes. Every human life is worthy of our utmost respect and protection. Every human life matters. So needless to say, I do not support physician-assisted suicide or voluntary euthanasia of any legislation that will further devalue human life. My worldview is influenced by my life experiences, and most profoundly, it has been shaped by my faith. I believe that every human life has intrinsic value and dignity that needs to be held in high honor and esteemed, in other words, to be considered worthy. There's a saying in the Talmud, quote, "Whoever destroys a soul, it is considered as if he destroyed an entire world. And whoever saves a life, it is considered as if he saved the entire world," end quote. On the Peace Tower of our Parliament buildings, carved in stone above the west window, you will find these words taken from ancient Hebrew writings in the book of Proverbs, quote, "Where there is no vision, the people perish," end quote. What is our vision for Canada? I ask each of my colleagues today, what is your vision for Canada? My vision for Canada is one where every human life is valued and cherished from the moment of conception to the moment of natural death. It is my firm belief that life is a gift from God and that this gift is far too precious to be discarded or destroyed. Every human life is filled with infinite value, and yes, every person, regardless of disability, deformity, depression, or devaluation based on criteria of so-called usefulness, has something to teach us about what it means to be human. For those who are suffering, we have the privilege to come alongside and care deeply. We provide proper pain relief, palliative care, human touch, and love. In other words, we provide compassion. The very meaning of the word compassion is to suffer with. Compassion. To come alongside and enter into the suffering, to come alongside with feelings and care. Compassion is supporting them. To ignore the fact that compassion has everything to do with relationships if we're going to allow physician-assisted suicide. You simply cannot have compassion if the relationship has been intentionally terminated. That being said, the Supreme Court of Canada has established grounds for an exemption from prosecution for physicians who would assist in administering the suicide dose or carry out the act of euthanasia. The Supreme Court of Canada has done this, completely rejecting the fact that elected members of the House of Commons have rejected initiatives to legalize physician-assisted suicide on at least 15 occasions since 1991. Most recently, a bill to allow physician-assisted suicide was rejected in 2010 by a vote of 59 to 226. My contention is that it is not the job of the Supreme Court to create laws, but rather to interpret them. Mr. Speaker, I was one of the members of Parliament who served on the Joint Committee appointed to study physician-assisted dying. Our committee heard from many witnesses representing many different viewpoints. We heard from medical professionals. We heard from palliative care experts, mental health professionals, disability community, Aboriginal community, from the various faith communities, from legal and constitutional experts, from ethicists. And as you might expect, Mr. Speaker, from such a large variety of people, there was a very diverse response. The unfortunate reality is that the timeline given to our committee for the completion of our report and recommendations did not allow for a large number of groups who wanted to appear before this committee. Groups like Euthanasia Prevention Council, L'Arche Canada, Living with Dignity, Dr. Balfour Mount, who is considered to be the father of palliative care in Canada, in fact in North America. These were not allowed to appear at all. The Joint Committee report had no teeth when it came to insisting that before physician-assisted suicide can be offered or even considered in Canada, there should at the very least be a credible offer of accessible and affordable palliative care to those who are facing such a final solution of hastened death. Bill C-14, like the committee report, fails miserably in stepping up with real change on this crucial issue. Dr. Harvey Kochanov, chair of the external panel, professor of psychiatry at the University of Manitoba, and Canada Research Chair for Palliative Care, suggests that all patients requesting medical aid in dying would need to have a palliative care consultation to ensure that patients are fully informed of all palliative care options that could be initiated in order to mitigate the patient's suffering. To ignore the very real lack of choice without a concurrent real offer of palliative care is to offer no choice, only hastened death. I am thankful that C-14 has incorporated many of the viewpoints of the dissenting report. However, it still includes very vague and subjective language and does not address many key issues raised by witnesses who appeared before the committee. A major concern in the entire discussion has been the overt attempts to soften the language. Rather than call it physician-assisted suicide or voluntary euthanasia, it was then referred to as physician-assisted dying. Even physicians objected vigorously to the term physician-assisted dying, especially palliative care physicians, because for many decades, these doctors have been assisting patients through the natural dying process. It has been said that all social engineering is preceded by verbal engineering, and you will find no better example of that verbal engineering than in the matter before us today. This topic is far too important to allow this vague and euphemistic language to go unchallenged. As Dr. Kochanov notes, Bill C-14 makes no distinction between physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia, yet both are included in what the bill calls medical assistance in dying. It's extremely important to outline the difference, Mr. Speaker, because international experience reveals that they are vastly different in terms of their uptake and lethality. In jurisdictions that offer only physician-assisted suicide, like Oregon, for example, these deaths account for only 0.3% of all deaths, where in jurisdictions that offer euthanasia, hastened death accounts for 3.0, a tenfold increase, Mr. Speaker. If we're to extrapolate these figures to Canada, where there are approximately 260,000 deaths per year under a physician-assisted suicide regime, there would be about 780 deaths per year. But if you were to extrapolate that to allow for euthanasia, the number of deaths would increase to 7,800 per year. As I pointed out, a tenfold increase. The reason for the lower numbers under a physician-assisted suicide regime is ambivalence. It's crucial that at the very least the government needs to point out that if we're going to proceed with this, that we have to ask that those who are requesting physician-assisted death they have to follow through on physician-assisted death rather than voluntary euthanasia because the numbers are so much different. Another key missing component is the matter of conscience protection for doctors and healthcare workers. If it's possible to ensure a consistent approach to medical assistance in dying, as the preamble asserts, there's no reason why at the same time a consistent approach to guarantee conscience right cannot be included in C-14. Finally, Bill C-14 should include a system of judicial oversight in order to protect vulnerable persons. While 2 independent witnesses and 2 independent doctors sounds good on paper, the risks of overt or subtle coercion are too great and the possibility of abuse too real. These assertions need to be verified under a framework of legal oversight. In summary, Mr. Speaker, we should be offering hope to all Canadians. As legislators, we should be doing everything in our power to make sure that not one single person dies needlessly. It is with this in mind that I repeat the need for at least 3 major amendments to C-14. Number 1, vulnerable Canadians need better protection with a system of judicial oversight. Number 2, doctors, healthcare personnel, and healthcare institutions need clear conscience protection. And finally, Canadians who are suffering need a real option of palliative care, not hastened death. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Mount Royal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member for his comments. It's very clear he's very passionate about life, and it certainly comes through in what he said. I want to ask him about his comments about the Supreme Court. Now, the member seems to believe that the Supreme Court needs to defer to the will of Parliament, but that is not the Charter of Rights-oriented system that we now have in Canada. We adopted a Charter of Rights because we believe that a Charter of Rights guarantees the protection of individual liberties regardless of what the majority necessarily believes. And in this case, whether the member likes it, whether I like it, whether other members like it or not, the Supreme Court came to a decision in Carter that said that medically assisted dying is open to a certain segment of the Canadian population. I want to ask the honourable member, based on what he said, it sounds to me like what he's suggesting is his only real path is using the notwithstanding clause and overriding the court's decision. Is that what the honourable member is actually asking us to really do?
Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague, and I know that he also is passionate about life. Mr. Speaker, it's clear that with the very short timeline that the committee had to hear witnesses, to take all of that input, to come up with a report, give to the government, and then the government to craft legislation. And now we're under a very strict timeline, even in terms of debate in the House. And the committee itself, the Justice Committee, will be under an extremely short timeline. It's clear to me that we do not have adequate time to give this serious topic the serious consideration that it really needs. So whether the government wants to implement or invoke the notwithstanding clause or not, I'm not going to suggest that. I certainly think it would be one option. But what I do know, Mr. Speaker, is that by rushing ahead the way we are at this point, we will not have the kind of law that Canadians deserve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague. I have great respect for the work he's done on issues of palliative care over the years with the work with the All-Parliamentary Committee. And we agree on many things and disagree on some things, as wont in this House. I share his frustration in terms of the Supreme Court decision, in terms of the timelines. In that, and I respect the Supreme Court's right and power to establish rules and laws where they believe Parliament has left a vacuum, but I believe that the new government should have been given the opportunity as a form of goodwill to engage the population of this country in this very important discussion, because it affects every single person. This cuts across party lines. It would have been fair to give the new government that ability to hear from Canadians, because I agree, we are now under a very strict timeline that the Canadian people are watching but not part of. But having said that, given that these are the limits that have been placed on us by the Supreme Court, my concern is the legal vacuum that happens if we as a House do not respond to that, and the dangers of what a legal vacuum will create in terms of other individuals, organizations stepping forward and knowing that they can go to the Supreme Court if Parliament has not acted. And I want to ask my colleague if he's considered the danger of that legal vacuum if we do not have a law in place by the end of June.
The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for the work that he's done on palliative care, and I was honoured to be able to support the motion that he presented to the House last year, I believe it was. And yes, it was an honour to work across Parliament, across partisan lines, to facilitate the report not to be forgotten, which includes many recommendations. And Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to say that a number of those recommendations have been completely or partially implemented, but we do have a long way to go. I am concerned as well about the potential legal vacuum that could exist if we don't do anything. But Mr. Speaker, I pointed out in my comments that there are at least 3 key amendments that this legislation needs if it's in any way going to resemble what I think are adequate safeguards for vulnerable people. And those include that vulnerable Canadians need better protection with a system of judicial oversight. It's fine to say there are 2 medical doctors, there are 2 independent witnesses, and yet there's no way of actually asserting that those are in fact independent. The other one is healthcare protection for conscience of healthcare workers. Mr. Speaker, it would be totally inappropriate for an institution that was set up to actually improve end-of-life care and to walk with patients through that end-of-life natural process to demand that they actually go diametrically opposite to the principles under which they were founded and now have to participate in physician-hastened death. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Reprise du débat, resuming debate. The honourable